Okay, everyone, this is my spoiler review of the White Lotus Season 3, Episode 7, Killer Instincts. I'm going to break my review into different parts. We'll go with every different character storyline. I want to start off with everything with Rick, but I want to point out this episode has a huge themes about violence and why it can be seen as unnecessary and such growth not using violence, but also times where you see Mook will talk about violence and when it can seem necessary. And I like that this episode is showing the violent fight happening that is just cutting between all of these scenes or seeing something that's like pure violence happening. So let's start with everything with Rick, and I'll go more into those themes as we go along. So we go right where we left off, where Rick sees Jim for the first time, played by Scott Glenn. I know him most from The Leftovers and Daredevil. He's always great in these types of parts. And what actually really was working well for me in this episode was everything going on with Frank and Sertila. I think that Sam Rockwell just brings so much to the show, and this character Frank is very funny. I love when he has to name action films he made, and he says The Enforcer, The Executor, and The Notary, and he's like, that was a trilogy. And you see that Rick is so focused on Jim that he's really not helping Frank at all here, and that Frank is literally having to do everything and keep this conversation going. So much so that he stops just drinking tea, and he actually relapses here and has whiskey. I also like they show that Jim mentions the actress staying at the hotel is on a show they watch, Jacqueline Lemon. So that also shows you the demo of what type of show that Jacqueline is actually on and who's watching it. Probably a show that's, I would imagine, on cable and appeals to the older crowd that just throws on, like Jim's saying, whatever his wife is watching or whatever's on the TV. Something I don't think Jacqueline would be thrilled to hear. Now, Frank will tell Sertila her character is a former prostitute, but that does not line up well with what Rick was saying, that her character would be someone that is based off of her life. So that's a big red flag to her. And while this scene is happening, we're seeing a lot of Rick and we're seeing other scenes we're going to get to. This is layered under the monk saying, every one of us has the capacity to kill. Buddhist scripture condemns violence in every form. It all stems from fear. He says violence does spiritual harm to the victim and the perpetrator. So what is important about that is that it's setting you up thinking that certain characters are going to commit violence in this episode, and a lot of them resist it. One of the most obvious ones here is Rick. And before we get to that confrontation, you see that Frank actually gets really lucky here, and it's lucky for Rick too, because he guesses a movie plot of her playing a queen. And even Rick is messing up so bad that he finally talks and he slips up and calls Frank when he should be calling him his fake name, Steve. And I love, while he's having this very serious scene with Jim in his office, that Frank is watching Sertila's old videos there. We know he's into Asian women, and you kind of see a connection there. But Rick brings up in Jim's office how the real power is knowing when to stop. And he's alluding to Jim and how he went too far against his father and got too power hungry. And he gets to how he didn't have a childhood. He speaks his piece. He's like, I fantasize about this moment 1,000 times. He brings up his father he had killed over a land deal, and when he says his mother's name, Jim doesn't recognize it. So he points his gun at Jim as having a Sawyer moment from Lost. He's like, you ruined my effing life. You may not remember him, but you sure as F are going to remember me. But he doesn't shoot him. He doesn't hit him. He just throws him down in the chair just to slow him up here. Tells the bodyguards old man fell. Better help him. Get everybody off of his tail. Now, I don't think that's the last we're going to see of those bodyguards. I don't think Jim's going to be too happy about this. And this is where I'm going to my belief I said in my last review that it's going to end with Gaitok actually using his gun, actually having a killer instinct, because he's getting influenced now by Mook, who is saying that violence is necessary in some parts, and that he's going to end up taking care of those bodyguards when they come back after Rick. So Rick tells Frank afterwards how he felt about it. And he's like, I built up this guy in my mind to be this thing, and I'm sitting there and he's just pathetic, frail old man. I mean, I couldn't even hit him. And Frank's like, so you got some closure? And he's like, yeah. So it's kind of, he says it kind of not sure even himself. But when they go to town in Bangkok and they're partying, while they're all having this crazy time around him, Rick is just smiling, thinking about what just happened, his confrontation. So I believe he does feel some closure. He feels happiness that he did this. And I think deep down he'll start to realize more and more that it was great that he couldn't hit him and that he had avoided violence there. So I think that is something that's going to show growth on Rick's character. With Rick's story now getting away from these bodyguards, I do feel like, in a way, this was kind of a wrap somewhat on Rick's storyline in his character growth with this character, and I think we'll see him talking like that and realizing and reflecting on it in the next episode. Now let's go to everything with Timothy, Victoria, and Saxon. Now Tim is slamming down these pills, and it's time to go to Greg's party. I love the first thing Chloe asks when they get to the door is, "Where's your brother?" Knowing now, when you've watched this episode, that she knows the plan at the end of the night is to get this fantasy going for Gary, and that she was thinking Lachlan was coming too. So she was down to do this incest thing again in front of Gary. And I think it's really weird. And I think that Chloe is someone who gets off in a lot of the audience's mind. And I think it was good. A lot of commenters pointing out that, like, Chloe's really messed up here. She's okay with a lot of stuff that goes on around her. And that Chelsea's so judgmental of Saxon, but has no judgment of Chloe, which is very hypocritical. Now, Saxon's with Chloe, and Chloe says Saxon one day will be one of those losers back home, is the name we'll use, with one of those young girlfriends at the party. But Saxon's kind of right here to call back, like, what's any different? You're dating an older balding man yourself. And she's like, well, it's different because the first day we met, he told me his whole life story. Knew we were meant to be together. Has the sadness. It really touches me. I want to heal him. A yin and yang battle. I'm hoping Rick is pain. Eventually one of us will win. But Chloe, that's just not a healthy relationship. And it's, again, what I've said before about her, where she has this savior complex. And it's so important they show this scene with Victoria then, asking this young girl at the party who's dating an older guy, why are you with this middle-aged weirdo? And she's like, you can't say that. And she's like, actually, I love Rupert. So it's showing you there really is no difference between what that girl is saying and what Chloe's saying. And at the end of the day, it's all hypocrisy. So there's other reasons they're obviously dating these men, and they act like it's not the reason. So I think that's really important that the show was pointing that scene out. I wouldn't say that if they didn't show the scene of Victoria, but I think it's going there with kind of, now we're seeing a little more hypocrisies of a fan favorite in Chelsea and things she say that just don't line up. I mean, she's with a man who has been ignoring her now constantly and is not emotionally available for her this whole show, and acts like they're the perfect match. Now, Timothy, pilled out and drinking, is talking to Greg about the monk, and he's like, he seems like he's the real deal. And then that's when Saxon pulls him aside. So him saying he seems like the real deal, I still feel like Timothy is going to end up at the monastery at the end of the next episode. But I have changes now to Piper, which we'll get to when we get to Piper's story. But Saxon finally confronts his father about something's wrong with the business. And you see Saxon's telling him that his career is tied to him, and that he put all his eggs in his dad's basket, and that if something's going wrong with his dad and his business, then his life is going to be in shambles. He's like, this is all I have. I knew right that moment, I think everybody knew, that this was going to be a moment where, like last episode of Victoria saying she's going to have nothing, this is going to be a moment where Timothy is going to add this to his murder-suicide fantasy and putting a new character in there in Saxon, and that's what we're going to get by the end of the episode. And when that scene happens, it's so funny when Victoria is actually praying, and she's praying for Piper to be miserable in the temple tonight. She's like, maybe Jesus will save her from those Buddhists. Such a funny line. But when Timothy goes to look for the gun after he has the fantasy, it's not there. He's protected. It's stopped again. So it's not a choice of him not to do violence. He wants to do violence, but he's avoiding it, and it's for the better for his life. You know, there's no choice of doing suicide is a good choice. So, and taking out people with you. So I think that that's going into the avoiding violence part of this episode and the story of the season as a whole. But like I think Mike White's trying to point out, when you go too extreme with that kind of belief, that violence is wrong in all cases. There is cases where it's necessary. I think it's just, again, leading a character who already was in that belief in Gaitok, now going the other direction in an area probably very justified. Next episode. Now, Chloe reveals to Saxon Greg's sexual fetish. And I saw a lot of people predicting this last episode that he was actually going to want Saxon there for that reason. And it's interesting, Chloe said last episode that he seemed kind of into it and not jealous. I didn't see that in Greg's behavior in that scene, which I thought was weird. Like, I didn't see any hint of that when they were talking, but it is the case. But we learned that his parents would have loud sex all the time with the door open, and he would watch. And this would develop a behavior in him where he'd get really possessive and jealous of people he dated, and jealous of his best friends and thinking they were sleeping with his girlfriend. And she's like, it turned out that he wanted it actually to be happening, that his worst nightmare was his erotic fantasy. So Chloe suggests Saxon taking on that role. And the sound design here at Saxon's revelation, what's happening, and the moaning and Chloe's facial reactions, like, yeah, do it, were so funny. And Greg just looking back at them was so just perfect. Now, he's like, no way, Saxon doesn't do it. This is also a change in character for Saxon. I feel like Saxon is becoming the one who's getting more of a redemption arc now and more likable as each episode goes on now, which I think shocked a lot of people, but it's happening. I think that's very unique, and I like that Mike White's kind of surprising us with that. And you see he walks Chloe home, and he's like, you have the wrong impression of me. I'm not just one thing. I could be somebody else if I wanted. And he's like, I bet I could connect with you on a spiritual level if you wanted. Very interesting line, and it's exactly what Chloe's going to want to hear and is attracted to. So she also starts to show him how to meditate, and he flips his hand onto hers. And I'm telling you, in that moment, she's resisting Saxon, and he's obviously playing a bold move. But she felt something there for a second, like an attraction to him in this moment. And it makes sense because we know she is attracted to broken people, and that is the case with Saxon here, and someone she's starting to see opening a slot here that could be someone she can change and turn around with spirituality. So it kind of spooks her in that way, I think, more than actually the way of him kind of coming under her. And I think Saxon was getting an effect from the meditation too. It's that real opposite attraction, just like her and Rick, but it's kind of there with Saxon, and she knows it. So I think it's a big surprise here is that is even a possibility, and that's kind of happening here with Chelsea and Saxon. And in the same time, Rick is all voicemails during this one. Probably a good time to pick up your girlfriend's phone calls. Now, from an art standpoint, I think this episode with Rick and the Ratliffs was good, but from an entertainment and feeling of a penultimate episode, I feel like it's a little bit of a letdown, and that there's really good stuff going on, but entertainment value wise, boy, I mean, compared to the last two seasons, I just think it's slow going, and it's still slow going. And say what you want, but I mean, there's got to be a part of it too that's a little more entertaining, where some of it still kind of just felt a little flat. Now let's go to Belinda and Zion. Now, Greg at the party asked to speak to her alone, and he's like, you know who I am, and he's like, I had nothing to do with it, talking about Tanya's death. He wants to be able to just live his life in Thailand in peace. So he's trying to pay her off. He knows that she wanted to start a business that Tanya was going to help her start and give her money. So he's like, I'll give you $100,000. And she says, I need to think about it. So Zion, rightfully so, is like, are you crazy? Take the money. But Belinda has some standards here. She's like, she doesn't think it's right. She doesn't want to be an accomplice to a murder. But he's like, you really have no choice, because he's like, if you don't, he's going to kill you anyway. And he's probably going to kill me too. So I do think it's interesting that there's also not this option of like, you don't have to take the money, but you could just tell Greg also like, okay, I won't tell anybody. Like, let's just like let bygones be bygones and leave. So it's interesting Belinda didn't do that. It's kind of silly to me, because it just seems stupid anyway you look at it, to just kind of let this crazy guy you've been scared of the whole season think that you might rat on him. And if you were going to rat on him, I think that's insane also, because what exactly is that going to lead to? It's not like the police are going to do something right away. That would be years and years of trials and stuff like that, investigation. So I think that's a little shaky in that storyline, and very kind of odd, and maybe not landing as great. But there's one episode to go, so I can't judge that fully yet. And that's with all these storylines, so we'll see. But I think it was kind of what you kind of expected was going to happen between these two, and it wasn't like this like whoa thing, or it was just there. So it was okay, nothing amazing or memorable. And I feel like it's just a huge misdirect for most of the season to what that body will be that Zion saw. It's definitely not Belinda. Let's go to the three best friends, and their dinner table is already awkward the minute they sit down. That's why they're so anxious for this rosé bottle, and everyone starts airing it out. And it's also implied at one point that Laurie says that Jacqueline was all over Dave, who is Kate's current husband in White Lotus, at Laurie's wedding. So that's interesting, and that makes you wonder if Jacqueline actually slept with Dave before Kate married him, when she probably was going after him herself. And Jacqueline calls Laurie a martyr. Laurie doesn't trust Jacqueline. Kate at this moment agrees that Laurie's a martyr, and then Laurie's like, well, Kate, you're always fake and front like your life is perfect. And she's like, Jacqueline, you're vain and selfish. You did something effed up, and I'm the one that has a problem. And that's been the story of Jacqueline too, is she's so hypocritical and calls someone out as like a martyr, but Jacqueline actually is a martyr herself. You see that in the next scene when Kate's actually feeling remorse about what happened to Laurie, and she's shocked Jacqueline isn't. And Jacqueline says, you don't know my situation. So it's still not admitting any wrong on what she did. And she's like, no, don't worry though, it's fine. I'll be the bad guy. I'm used to it. So there you go, just being a hypocrite right there. That's classic martyr syndrome line right there. And at this, Laurie already chose she was going to the fight, so it sets up Lauren and Oleski to get it on. But it's quickly revealed he wants money from Laurie. I don't think this is a true story that his mother was sick. He just wants her money. We know he is one of the robbers and took the snake charm that Laurie will actually see. And we see the girl at the club shows up and then starts hitting Laurie on the head when she's jumping out the window, which is kind of funny. But again, this storyline too, it just feels like where you thought it would go, it's going. And it's still not amazing to me. I think it's just kind of like something you've seen in some other shows before. So I think it's okay, but we got one episode to go left, and I think there could be something really interesting how they're going to wrap this up, especially with Jacqueline. But we'll see. Now with Piper and Lachlan, not much screen time here, which I would have liked to see a little more. But the food's not great. It's super quiet. You can tell Piper isn't really loving this. She's bored. And Lachlan says to her he likes the monk and doesn't want to give in to his dark stuff. You know what that is. And Lachlan tells her he wants to stay with her. He's like, I don't feel like going home, like, ever. And Piper's like, yeah. So I actually think Piper was expecting him to say he didn't like it that much, and it was kind of maybe be a way out for her to see that way, because I think deep down Piper's not really enjoying this. Like, you see how she's lying in bed at night. It's a hard bed. They show a point of the dripping water and that there's leaks and the dogs are barking. It's not this, like, nice hotel room and the privilege she's used to. And also, I don't think she's obviously liking the idea if she was to go here to have her family there with her. I mean, that's not in her vision, in her mind of what was going to happen here, is to get away from her family. So Lachlan coming would go against that. But I just don't think this is expecting the vibe she was feeling. Like it was going to be all roses and nice and peaceful. But now I'm thinking Piper isn't going to end up there. And maybe Lachlan and Timothy end up at the monastery and their little ending, getting away from their lives. Because how can Lachlan go back from what happened with his brother to a normal life at home? That's why he's obviously appealed to stay there. I don't think he's really that touched by the monk. Now let's finish off with Mook and Gaitok. They have their first date, and he tells her he's not getting promotion and explains that he wasn't scared when he didn't stop the robbery. It's just, it felt wrong. The Buddha condemns violence. And that's where the argument from Mook is, but what about in defense? He's like, yes, I know, but I never want to hurt people. I will never feel good about that. She says, it's good you have strong morals, but you have to live in this world. You have to be strong. That's part of the job. I think that is the big message of this episode too, is that that's part of the world, right? And that we have our job as people to survive in it. And I think that's a point too of that, where there's situations where, yes, it is necessary. And it's not like this monk is saying where every situation is that case of nonviolence. But she also shows her true colors and is like, I also thought you were more ambitious and wanted a better job. So not looking good there for Gaitok, but it's also a good way to push Gaitok and make it believable that he would actually change a part of himself for this girl he also is obsessed with. And that's, I think, going to come full circle next episode. And you see they're setting it up when Gaitok's putting it all together. He notices the Russians and the bald one, that we get to see the front of his face this time, and that they were the robbers. And I had said in a previous review that when they showed Alesky's snake tattoo, he was clearly the guy who stole the snake charm, and that Valentin was a distraction at the gate. So the question is, what does Gaitok do with this knowledge the next episode? So we will see, especially because Valentin is a worker at the resort, so it's a little more of a complicated situation. And how does everyone kind of align together, especially the three best friends in that part of the story? But I don't know, this is one of the hardest episodes of TV I've ever really had to give a score. I don't really know how to feel. I've watched it twice. I'm conflicted. I think it's really strong in parts, but when I look at it as where it is in the season and the pace of the season as a whole, I still think it felt like the last episodes were airtight and moving at a great pace and things boiling up. And then like I felt like it kind of simmered down a bit, but in a little bit of a flat way. And not making me that excited for the finale. Like, we're going to get a reveal of the shootout, whose body it is. But the stories of the characters, like, how many times can we see Timothy have a fantasy about suicide? How many times can we see him take these pills? How predictable is Piper's reaction to the monastery? You know, there's things like that where it's like, do we need all this time for certain storylines? Even with Belinda, and it's just feeling kind of dragged out. And I don't know. It's hard to judge this episode because it's in limbo where maybe I'll look back at this episode and like it way better when the finale comes out. But right now, it just feels like, was this season as satisfying the last two with all the time you spent with these characters? Because now I'm honestly feeling like I kind of want to leave the resort now. Like, I'm ready to go on a plane home, which I didn't think I'd feel after this episode. So I still liked a lot of it, though, and as work of art and the stuff they're writing here. I get it with the nonviolence, and it's just the entertainment value. It's so hard to judge it all together. But right now, I'm going to give it an 8, and I think that it could go up looking back. And if, let's say, the finale is a complete letdown, it can go down. I'm going to give it an 8 right now. I'm curious as what you guys think. And I think that next episode, I want to hear your theories too. But my theory going is that those bodyguards are going to come for Rick. Rick's going to find something happening with Chelsea and Saxon. Everything's going to go haywire. Gaitok's going to save the day. Valentin's also going to get caught, but that's going to somehow connect to Jacqueline. And that, I think, Lachlan and Timothy will end up at the monastery. I don't know what's going on with Victoria. Her character's kind of not had much layers to her at the moment, so that's been also a little disappointing, but we'll see. Let me know, though. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment, try to respond as many as I can. Hit that sub button so you don't miss one of my reviews of the White Lotus. I'm also doing Handmaid's Tale at the moment, and I'll be doing the studio soon as well. And I'll see you next time.